The Super Bowl is over. NFL Combine is around the corner. Free agency just beyond that. ADP is going to be shifting all over the place. Myself and Tyler, we've jumped into a whole bunch of slow drafts in these early underdog best ball contests, and we are making those picks with you, giving you a little bit more time than those normal sort of 30 seconds that you get in between each pick, where we can talk you through our process whilst we can go back and forth on the players we want to and work out how we feel about these players in 2025 fantasy football drafts. Tyler, where are we starting off?
Saquon at the 103 seems really strong and a fun way to kind of mix up the combos at the end of things. So very fine taking Saquon after having a super strong season that was a ceiling from heaven that could have been even better with a few more games, with a few more touchdowns. So very comfortable taking him after Chase and Jefferson are off the board.
Yeah, I mean, Chase and Jefferson gone. It just feels like not taking Saquon is overthinking it a little bit. I very much understand the argument for Bijan Robinson to be the RB1 overall or even Jahmyr Gibbs, but if you're getting a little ADP slide, I'm completely fine with it. So let's just get Saquon Barkley locked in on that one. No need to kind of go too crazy to start things off. Moving on to the next one, though, like we're facing down the 102, and here again, it's kind of a situation like where would you want to make an argument to take Justin Jefferson and drag him up higher? We already know that we're probably not pushing Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson above Saquon at the minute.
I think for us specifically, we're going to get close to maxing this contest. And with the way that things work, I think portfolio management is underrated. And we haven't gotten a lot of picks in the middle area where we can take Justin Jefferson. So as far as making sure we have access to someone that has a super strong single game and full season ceiling seems prudent. Like you said, I like Bijan, I like Jahmyr Gibbs, but both of those guys are seeing less total workload with their field mates back behind them. And Saquon just has a stronger full season argument, which is part of this. We're drafting in February. I think that's prudent to make. Justin Jefferson does have some question marks right now. Darnold seems unlikely to return. We don't know the health of JJ McCarthy, but KOC has proven that this offense will operate at a pretty high level. He'll get a quarterback that'll come in and play well, even if it's a quarterback we thought was not very good going into the season. I think taking Justin Jefferson here over Saquon Barkley for construction purposes, knowing that we'll have some strong running backs at the 2-3 turn to pair with him, seems something wise considering the wide receivers do drop off pretty precipitously after pick 11 or 12.
Yeah, I'm completely good bringing Justin Jefferson up. I think what you talk about the running backs at the back of the second round makes plenty of sense. And look, we're drafting a lot of Saquon Barkley, so completely fine. Mixing it up a little bit and getting a Justin Jefferson start. Sure. Okay, so this is our third pick in a row where everything seems to be quite similar. Is now the time where it's like, okay, let's just throw in some Bijan Robinson so we don't end up with too much Saquon Barkley, so that we don't pass him over too much for Justin Jefferson. Are you comfortable taking him here, even though we've kind of already covered the downsides of Bijan Robinson compared to Saquon Barkley?
Absolutely. If you're doing a lot of volume, it's prudent to make sure that your exposures are at a good spot. If Saquon gets hurt, you don't want to have 40% of your contests in a bad spot with your first round pick being down. So in a vacuum, I of course like Barkley over Bijan, but considering over the entirety of the contest, a great player who's got some nice youth, who had some strong production, seems prudent to include him here in our portfolio.
Yeah, there's very few players in the first round currently who I'd like to have less than 5% on at the minute. So let's move on, see if we can find any of those players over that we might want to fade completely. This one is the pick 102. Again, we're facing a lot of similar situations. Tyler, where do you want to go with this one?
I think this might be an interesting spot to pull up. And you're watching us get weird because we have 4 picks in a row after we did our first batch with a lot of Saquon. So here at the 102, I don't mind pulling up someone just for unique combos. I see the argument to just mix up guys with some of these strong running backs in the second and third round. I don't want to be too overexposed to the top 3 running backs. And I want to make sure I have good exposure to the wide receivers in the first round that have really strong outcomes, single game and full season.
Okay, then. So you want to go Justin Jefferson, or are you feeling a bit fruitier and want to go like Nico Collins or CeeDee Lamb?
Let's do Nico or CeeDee. That seems fun. Because like I said, how often are you going to see those pairings with guys like Bucky, JT, and Jacobs, etc.?
So then the question kind of becomes who you're more into, Nico Collins or CD Lamb? For me, I prefer Nico Collins. I think that I've got more confidence in his role within that offense at the minute. I think that I've got more confidence in the Texans figuring things out. And I just think that Nico Collins is just unreal and still being underappreciated.
And no one's had a stronger yards per route run over the last 2 years than Nico Collins himself. And outside of the injury bug that he got, the offensive line being one of the worst it's been in a decade, and a couple of long touchdowns being called back, I like his chances to be a top 5 pick going forward, especially with potential offensive scheme improvements.
Okay, so now on this one, we are starting off with the 101. We've already talked about how we've got plenty of Saquon Barkley across both this range of drafts and the previous slows that we did. Jamar Chase is the 101 on Underdog at the minute with an ADP of 102, Saquon Barkley at 2.3. When you get the 101, are you just auto-clicking Jamar Chase?
At this point, I want to make sure that I'm not underweight Chase, who showed us he can score 30 points at will. And the Bengals seem like a team that are going to start getting serious about not starting slow in the season. And I think that benefits Jamar Chase, who's about to get a huge contract with the Bengals. So I definitely want to make sure I have Chase going into the 2025 season and the 2025 playoffs.
I think also it's worth pointing out that if the Bengals are going to keep this core together of T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, and Jamar Chase, then it is going to come at the expense of defense. We know they've changed defensive coordinator for the first time in several years. This defense isn't suddenly going to be much better than it was last year, which forced the offense into situations where they had to be pass heavy, where they had to really go after it. We know that they're in a division with the Ravens. The Browns should be slightly better this year. The Steelers potentially could be a little bit more consistent. The Bengals have got a nice schedule. I think that there's every reason why the Bengals can be incredibly high scoring. And yeah, Jamar Chase easily has one of the highest ceilings of any player on any given week. So I'm completely fine with him as my 101 this year.
And he's got the outs that, today the news that T. Higgins is getting tagged. They might re-sign him. All signs point to that being the desired outcome, but we've seen the Bengals not sign him to a long-term extension the last 2 years, and that frustrating T. So there is still the possibility that we go into the season with Jamar Chase and Yoshi Voss being the main 2 receivers, and Jamar Chase's single game and full long season then from a volume perspective become monstrous. And he has outs to being a very strong pick. If T misses any time or just doesn't return to the Bengals. And at this point in February, it seems like a really strong bet to make.
So then moving on to the next draft, we've got Jamar Chase followed by Saquon Barkley. We're picking up 103 again. So another early selection for us. Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs feels like the call here, unless you want to make an argument for taking Justin Jefferson over one of them.
No, I think at this point we're underweight Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs in this contest, so both feel like strong picks to make. I definitely lean Bijan from a workload perspective over the course of the full season because the Lions are getting David Montgomery back. They are losing their offensive coordinator Ben Johnson to the Bears. We don't know how that's going to shake out. Jahmyr Gibbs has looked explosive, has looked like a fantasy-breaking asset. And we've seen Bijan have some work taken away by Tyler Algier, but when both sets of players are healthy, we've seen that Bijan tends to get more of the volume and the workload, and the offense under Michael Penix seemed much more consistent and stronger than under the hobbled and very physically limited Kirk Cousins. And I think that does a huge projection boost to Bijan. So over the full season, I do lean with that slight tier break of Bijan over Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, from week 9 onwards last year, Bijan, he was the RB2 with 21.3 PPR points per game. That's full PPR, but rather than half PPR. Ranked 4th in rushing yards per game, 2nd most rushing touchdowns, led the league in success rate on man and gap scheme success rate. Like I think what Bijan did over the back half of the season, it kind of went unnoticed a little more than it could have done simply because Kirk Cousins was stinking up the joint so much. So I definitely want to be above 10% Bijan Robinson this year in as many contests as possible. So locking him in here feels great. 101 was Jamar Chase in this one, and then a run of 3 straight running backs with Saquon, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs leaves us a big pool of wide receivers to choose from. At ADP, we're looking at Justin Jefferson, then Puka, Nacua, CD Lamb, who are tied at 6.8, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brian Thomas, and Malik Neighbors. Tyler, which of these guys have you been clicking the most in this little situation?
Justin Jefferson feels very fine. We did cover, question marks about who the quarterback are going to be. And an underrated part of that is that, we did see Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson both kind of, when everybody's healthy, pull away just enough that, Justin Jefferson was able to put up a 30-point game this season. But more and more frequently, he was not hitting the desired outcome band that we had liked. One could argue that was partially the offense ensuring that Darnold was spreading the ball around. We saw a lot of targets to the ancillary tight ends like Josh Oliver,
Yeah.
just to ensure that things were leveled out. So one could argue that moving on from Darnold would potentially allow the offense to flow more through Justin Jefferson simply because they're not trying to limit turnovers and throwing deep, despite Darnold, operating pretty well there. But by week 8, week 9, you saw the offense philosophically shift to try to reduce turnovers. And with Aaron Jones potentially not coming back, that could also make the offense more pass heavy with a potentially less efficient running back or just more efficient offense game to game. We saw some floor games out of this Darnold led offense against teams that shouldn't have been struggling with. So Justin Jefferson is a guy I click here, but I also don't mind going down to a guy like Nico Collins, Amon-Ra, BTJ, Malik Neighbors, who could all smash. I want to skate to where the puck is going, not necessarily get tied down to the names.
No, I'm good with Justin Jefferson here. I think you made plenty of valid points, but last year we saw with Justin Jefferson, he had his lowest amount of receptions per game, lowest yards per game since his rookie year, but he equaled his most touchdowns per year and trailed only Jamar Chase in receiving yards per game. I think that feels like kind of a flaw situation for me now. I'm not saying JJ McCarthy can't be worse than Sam Darnold, but I just think that Justin Jefferson has shown he finds a way to score fantasy points enough that I'm okay taking him as my wide receiver 2 more often than not.
No, absolutely.
This is one of the later picks that we've got in the first round within this next batch of slow drafts that we're currently going through. We are picking up a 109 here, and it is Nico Collins, who is in ADP at V806, then Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's similar range, Malik Neighbors. Before you get to running backs, Devon Achane, Derrick Henry, Ashton Genty, Christian McCaffrey. We pulled Nico Collins up earlier on one of the earlier drafts we did. So, for me, I think that the ceiling outcomes for Nico Collins are probably higher than Amon-Ra St. Brown. But at the same time, Amon-Ra St. Brown has been easily one of the most reliable wide receivers over the last few years. His weekly ceiling is as high as probably anyone. It felt like he got left out of the offense a little bit more this year because the Lions, they weren't having to be as pass heavy because their defense was better. So he saw a decrease in volume, decrease in yardage, but he set a career high in touchdowns with 13. Do you think that sort of step up in scoring touchdowns is enough for us to be able to rely on him in that department as a top 9 pick? Or do you think that the case for Nico Collins as a top 10 pick is just much easier to make?
I do think it's easier to make for Nico simply because he does operate as that boundary X receiver with just elite yak ability. And so his ability to score from anywhere on the field was once again on display this year, outside of injuries. Amon-Ra has underrated yak. I had someone call Amon-Ra this generation's Jarvis Landry. And when you compare the two's first 4 years, Amon-Ra doubled Jarvis Landry's yak. So, he is an underrated yak guy. The one thing with Amon-Ra's touchdowns is simply because the Lions have been, for the last few years, up until last year, so heavily focused on running back scoring in the red zone through a very strong rushing attack. And we saw it kind of even out with some of the pass catching of JMO and Amon-Ra and via Gibbs last year. And that certainly could be where it's trending with an older, more hobbled David Montgomery and a pretty explosive passing offense. The offensive line not as strong in years past. The defense coming back with health is going to be a question mark. So I think from your first round, you want one or two things, if not both, and that's upside and that's safety. You mentioned Amon-Ra is insanely consistent. The one thing that makes him slightly less consistent going into this year is the Lions just had a brain drain on both sides of the ball. We don't know how it's going to look going forward. We don't know how Goff's going to operate without, Ben Johnson. That is a question mark. So that's another slight win for Nico because while the play callers are changing, that is simply because they want more versatility out of their scheme. And we saw that the one thing hampering Nico Collins and this Houston offense as a whole was the lack of creativity and the lack of versatility the offense had. So Nico Collins seems like he can unlock another level up on the offense. And from a volume perspective, with Diggs potentially not returning as a 31-year-old coming off ACL and Tank Dell likely not playing football in 2025, it seems like Nico Collins is going to be the main beneficiary and focal point, with Joe Mixon being another year older and another year coming off an injury-hampered season. Whereas Amon-Ra, you're hoping that the offense still continues to flow through him as an outlet, but there are question marks about how that's going to shake out post Ben Johnson and with quite a few coaches leaving Detroit.
Yeah, and I'm not actively looking to fade Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I think this one, it's Nico Collins for me. So the next one we've got to is the 107. At the top of ADP is Puka Nacua, then Nico Collins, who we've already kind of talked about how high we are on him, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Can you make an argument for either Nico or Amon-Ra St. Brown over Puka Nacua in this situation where, earlier we pulled Nico Collins all the way up in the name of being different and creating a different outcome? But when you're looking to just like build a portfolio overall, do you want to just scoop the Puka Nacua value, or do you feel like one of the two wide receivers or even 3 or 4 wide receivers after Puka Nacua are stronger bets?
I think Puka finds himself in kind of a similar situation that Nico, where this is a very talented player who's extremely explosive and extremely dominant. I think Puka led the league in just like sheer target share. The guy is now the focal of the offense with Cooper Kupp leaving. I think from a vacuum volume standpoint, Puka is one of the strongest plays on the board. The big question that's leaked out in the last week or so is that insiders close to the Rams indicate that it's a more story than not, with Stafford potentially not returning. Now the QB question becomes as much of a question mark as it did for Justin Jefferson. That said, we tend to win fantasy by betting on talent, and Puka's shown to be. He's got the target share earning of Malik Neighbors with the yak of Nico Collins. This is like the build a character. And at the end of the day, I trust that if the Rams are moving on from Stafford, they're not going to go into the season without a competent quarterback in their back pocket. And Puka Nacua stands to be the main beneficiary of the weapon as it stands right now. And that's enough for me to alleviate just that volume and talent are the easiest things to bet on in fantasy. So I think Puka going at 7 is nice. I see him likely dipping like he did last year with any sort of questions or concerns about the offense. I'll be buying that, and I'll likely end up overweight simply because I want as much of these talented young players that are dominating their position, hoping that everything hits right as far as availability and health and efficiency, because if those all come together for Puka, he could easily be the Jamar Chase, had to have him type of player in fantasy.
Yeah, from when he returned in week 9 last year, he led the league in team target share rate at 32%, ranked 1st in targets per route run, ranked 5th in targets per game with 10.1 and 5th in fantasy points per game. It's just very difficult for me to build a downside case for Nacua. Even if Matthew Stafford leaves, I think I have enough faith in Sean McVay that I'd be completely comfortable taking him, and he's definitely not a player I want to fade in the first round.
Absolutely.
That's going to do it for this video. We will keep coming back to these slow drafts over the next couple of weeks and try to give you as many insights into our thought process early on in the offseason as we start to shape our rankings around the ADP as the ADP keeps fluctuating. If you want more best ball content, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. Leave us a comment telling us which players you're fading in round 1 and which players you're taking aggressive stances on. And for more Dynasty content, make sure you're checking out all the content that Rich is pumping out over here. Myself and Tyler back on Mondays for more drafts in the big board. Appreciate you checking us out, and we'll catch you again soon.